Good morning, welcome. Thank you everybody for coming here. I appreciate it at 8:30 in the morning. I promise we're going to do our very best to take what is a pretty exciting and hot topic and a good panel and turn it into hopefully a good interactive discussion so that when everybody leaves, they feel like they got some really good value in it. Before we begin, I just want to talk for a minute about IMCCA. Out of curiosity, show of hands, does everybody who knows who IMCCA is? A few of you, okay. So we're a nonprofit organization for the betterment of the communications and collaboration industry. We've been around since 1998. We do a lot of educational events like this. We are a really great organization. Our website has tons of information. It's a good resource for anything tied to the industry. It's really inexpensive to join. If you're an end user, it's free. So I would highly suggest that you join. You will only better yourself by it. If you have any questions, please feel free to seek out Carol Zelkin. She's the executive director, or talk to any board member from IMCCA. So who am I? I'm Michael Goldman. Gosh, I've been in the industry 25 years. I work at Crestron. I'm an IMCCA board member, and I'm your moderator or entertainment for the morning. So, and I'm just pausing because there are a couple of people walking in the door, but when I look at this image, right, a whole host of things come to mind. And it's an IT-centric image. And what is it doing? It's talking about devices that we're connecting to the network and ultimately the internet. And if you think about IoT, you think about everything happening on the show floor, every day more and more devices are getting connected. And it doesn't even matter the number, and the numbers are going to change, but they're going to continue to increase. But what's really interesting, a lot of the devices are ours, right? They're from our industry. And if you think about our industry, and you think about how we've done things, even though we've gone through convergence, there's still a huge difference in how AV people and IT people view scalability and security. And a quick test to that is, if I asked an AV person, what's a large project? What's a large deployment? What are something you're rolling out? The numbers I'm probably going to hear are 50, 100, 150 rooms. I might hear a little bit more than that at any given time. But if I go and ask an IT person that, I'm going to have a much larger number, right? I mean, it's going to vary with size of company, but the smallest number I'm probably going to hear is 1,000, right? And the people that I deal with in my day-to-day life are in large global enterprise. And I talk to people and say, hey, I'm rolling out 45,000 seats of Spectrum Business. I just have to touch 45,000 desktops. Or I'm rolling out 5,000 of this or 10,000 of that. It's a lot, right? And so the IT world has a lot of parameters around it, and we traditionally haven't. And now all of a sudden we're moving into that world. So as we start to increase the devices that we put on the network, and as the hacking community continues to grow and gain interest in our world, because let's face it, they understand that we're coming from a different perspective, we've got the makings of a perfect storm, right? We really do. And if you think about it, it kind of comes down to scale. Because as the scale goes up, the problems change. And not only do the problems change, but the way in which you solve the problems and deal with the problems change. They have to. Right? And to bring that home, there's a traditional AV system. And what do you see when you look at that? I see one of everything in an equipment rack. And I may be a little extreme, but to make the point, I see one of everything in an equipment rack. I see custom. If I were to take you on a tour of large companies in New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Boston, Chicago, any major city, and we go through and take a look at what people have installed, we're going to see a lot of that. We're going to hear talk about standards, but what we're going to truly see is that we're lucky if there are two systems that are the same. None of that was really designed to go in the network. There was no plan about system-wide management tools. It's labor-intensive to install. It's sometimes hard to use. It's really hard to manage. It's really hard to secure. And even more than that, it's not scalable. Right? So think about that first image and all the numbers of all the things that are going out there, and now look at what we do. We don't like to talk about this, but this is what we do and what we've done. Right? And that's why we're here. It's got to change. Let's go a little deeper. So now I've got this rack of equipment or this system. How did it get there? How did it get set up? And how do I manage it? So before I worked at Crestron, I worked in the AV integration role. So I was an integrator and I was a consultant. And so what happens? People on the integration team, not the owner, not the customer, not the end user, however you want to classify it, they come in with their personal device, a laptop, a mobile device. And what do? They connect it to the AV system. And they commission the system. And they configure the system. Or they do a firmware update to the system. Who's taking care of the laptop? How do we know if there's any malware or any viruses on the laptop? And it's not good enough to say, oh, well, I'm not going to let them connect the laptop to my network. They're just going to connect the laptop to my codec, which happens to be connected to my network. And I'm going to communicate bidirectionally to it. Right? There's huge, huge vulnerabilities there. We need to start thinking about, or at least it's my view, we need to start thinking about the only computers that are touching things are network authorized computers. And the way we deliver firmware and software updates are from hardened servers that are on the network. Anybody here seen one of these? And they all look different, but anybody been through a security assessment? Right, so I have a client who built out a tower 2 years ago. And a year later, the IT department rolled through with their security consultants, and they did an assessment. And they came back with a report that identified 385 vulnerabilities on a scale from 1 to 5. And they basically came back and said, look, anything from level 3 to 5, you need to clear up. We need a plan to clear it up. We need a timeline to clear it up. And if you don't clear it up, you're either going to get it turned off, or it's going to actually impact on your company's ability to get business management consulting firm. Think about that. How many people at the design phase early on in their project, or even halfway through it, think, oh gosh, we need to be concerned with this. Right, so here's a major issue, and this is becoming more important every single day. The takeaway to this, because all of these reports, it doesn't matter what company or consultant you have in there, they're all going to be a little different. But at the end of the day, what this is about, IT wants to understand who has access to these systems, what has access, can I see the traffic, the communications running between devices, right? And can I take these devices and set them up so that they can adhere to the best security practices, and I can ensure, to the best of my ability, that I'm not doing anything egregiously wrong that's going to hurt my business. And when in doubt, turn it off and say no. So this is a pretty big deal that I don't think many of us have thought of. The other important piece here, there's been a lot of hacking incidents over the last few years, right? And the reality is this: the hackers, they're not going through the firewall. They're not trying to come through the front door. The front door of the firewall on most of these companies is hardened. It's like a tortoise shell, right? And they recognize that. So what they do is they want to go inside, and they want to look for the devices that are behind the firewall in that sort of squishy interior. And you know whose devices live back there? Ours. AV devices. Even more importance to this. It's also in the mainstream media now, right? That's pretty scary. So now all of a sudden, vulnerabilities are coming up. People are talking about it in the news, and it doesn't matter what the cause of the vulnerability is. The point is, people are talking about it. CIO, if he hasn't contacted you, he's probably going to contact you, or she's going to contact you. And you really need to have answers. If you don't have answers, you're going to get shut down. Because it's not about AV equipment. It's about other valuable data that can be accessed through that network. It's about the business, right? And we don't want to be the weak link. We don't want to be the piece that causes that trouble. And oh, by the way, when I said the hackers like to go after the devices that are behind the firewall, they like to go after lean devices. They like to go after printers, phones, codecs, and other AV widgets. Just go out on the internet and start Googling this stuff. You'll see videos of guys that are from the ethical hacking community talking about how they've taken VoIP phones and turned them into listening stations, right? Or how they've taken HP printers and used them but just by sending a document to the printer, changing the firmware on the printer, and now they own the printer. So this is pretty serious stuff, and now it's coming into our world. I know in our booth and many other people's booths on the show, security is a topic. So it's pretty easy, right? If I'm going to go out and build a new system, I've got information, I understand I need to be secure, so I ask that question, I try to check the boxes. That's great for the new builds. What about the existing stuff? Ask yourself, how many rooms, how many systems do you have, or how many of your, for those of you that are integrators, how many of your customers have systems that you've put in, how many? And what's that estate look like? And where do those systems sit with the topic of security? And if InfoSec came in or a consultant came in tomorrow and ran an assessment or did an audit, what would they come back with? And I'm not saying to scare you, what I'm really saying is I'd be thinking about this because I'd want to put a plan together. The reality is that when consultants come through and they do these audits, they're going to find something. What they really want to know most importantly is if I found it, what's your plan to resolve it and what's the timeline to resolve it? So we got to start thinking proactively. We can't just try to brush it away and think it's going to go away. It's not. And if you go back to that very first third slide, I'd say the one with the traditional AV equipment rack, one of everything. And I was talking about the points as to why that's not scalable and why it's difficult to secure. Here's the other end of the extreme. This is stuff you're going to see on the show floor. These single vendor, single manufacturer solutions, off the shelf, kitted, easy to go together. So is this part of the answer? And did challenges of security and scalability open the door to this? Is this something we need to think about? And how does it impact your world? And what can we do as manufacturers to help? Right? Because if you're an owner, an integrator, or a designer, you're turning to those of us that are manufacturers. I happen to come from the manufacturing side of it. We build building blocks, right? We provide you with technology that you use to design, build, and use every day. So how can we help? We need to start thinking differently. Right? I can tell you within our company, we're focused on this every day. So we need to build products that support the important security protocols. We need to give you building blocks that will allow you to adhere to best practices so you at least have an opportunity or a chance to put something in place that will hold up. But we're only part of it. Then we've got consultants and integrators. And what can they do? So they need to start thinking about security at the beginning. And you, those of you that are end users, right? I find that people like to avoid, AV people, whether end user or integrator or consultant, they all like to avoid the IT department within their client. And they typically don't engage them, again, typically, until they absolutely need to because they say, hey, I need some IP addresses or I need a network port. So what can we do to help ourselves there? Let's go make a friend. Let's go have a conversation early on. Because if you have the conversation early on, they're going to embrace you. And guess what? They're not just there to do security assessments and give you a hard time. They're actually there to help. They'd love to help. So I would say to you that from the integrator and consultant and even end user or operator side of this, something to think about that we should be thinking about that's really important is let's go engage the InfoSec people and the IT people at the beginning. And let's ask them. Let's ask them questions. And then we should be challenging the manufacturers. And we're picking equipment. We shouldn't just be looking at audio and video capability and quality. We need to be looking at security capability. Right? It's just as important. It's going to play into the mix. And then architecture. Right? So as people are doing designs, we need to start thinking about more than just AV signal flow. We need to start thinking about architecture where we put these and locate these devices on the network. Really important kind of stuff. The last piece of this is computers. How about having plans? A plan that says, here's how we're going to deal with what machines can connect to the AV systems. Or here's the plan for patching and updates of firmware and software. Here's how it happens, here's when it happens. Right? Some of this is foreign to many people in the industry. These are things we need to start thinking about. And that is kind of this high-level umbrella that I was hoping that we could use to ask some questions of one another and hopefully have a really good interactive discussion. Right? I have plenty of questions that I'm ready to ask the panel here, but we want to hear from you. Like, you guys live it and deal with it every day, and we're here as a resource for you. So before we get into my questions, which I will use to kick this off or start this off, I'd like to introduce the panel. Really great team, and we'll start with Theo.
Hey guys. My name is Theo. I'm with Kramer Electronics. Been with them for the last 5 years, and before that I spent 9 years in telecommunications and IT. So hopefully I can bridge the gap.
Hi, I'm Mike Brandolfino. I'm currently CEO of a consulting company called Department 60. I'm also the chairman of the IMCCA, so thank you for joining these sessions. And prior to that, I was on the executive committee for the largest AV company, the ISBL.
Good morning, my name is Mitch. Good morning, Mitch Hershowitz. I lead customer experience and digital workplace for Dimension Data. We're a global systems integrator helping companies bring solutions that bring technology solutions that solve business issues within their organization.
And I'm Paul Zealy. I'm manager of enterprise solutions for Harman Professional. My job is to look at the overall end-to-end requirements for anything within enterprise, commercial and education and government, mostly focused on what does the AV world look like 3 to 5 years out. So I spend a tremendous amount of time looking at how these systems are going to interplay and work with networks and be supported in the future.
Great. Thanks, guys. So as you can see, we have a pretty knowledgeable team over here. To get things going, I think I'm going to call on Mike. Normally I'll put these out and whoever wants to respond, but I think I'll start with you. And I'm going to ask something that's really sort of broad and general, like when you go about your job, where do you begin? And how do you deal with both security and scalability as you're approaching new projects and new clients?
Well, I think from a scalability perspective, it really is changing. We used to talk to the facilities guys, and they talk about the square footage of the room and the lighting and things like that. And now, you're talking to the IT organizations, and you're talking about how many devices are plugging in, what is the bandwidth utilization going to be. So we're really talking about different things than we used to, because the devices used to be on an island in a room. So the design phase really becomes a little bit broader than it used to be. And you also, when I was at AVISBL, one of the things that we started doing was we started hiring CCIEs, network engineers. It's not just AV engineers anymore. You have to have the skill sets. And we also hired someone who was a security expert, because you need to be able to go toe-to-toe with the security guys at the IT organizations to be able to convince them that you can lay out a plan, introduce this technology into their network, and not introduce risks.
And before I ask more comments, just a little follow-up to that. Would you introduce or bring the topic up, or would you wait for them to bring it to you?
It depends on the office and the application. What we normally would do is have pre-prepared security statements. So we would have documents for our sales organization that they can provide as part of the proposal of the plan and say, hey, we understand the technology issues, here's what our white paper on that. And if that didn't suffice, or if that didn't drive the conversation, we get in touch after that.
Great, thanks. Paul?
I just want to extend on that. At Infocom, as we've been working in security and best practices, we absolutely recommend that integration companies have what I would call a standard security statement, which can be boilerplate as part of their design documents or proposal documents, whether or not security was asked for. Because what gets to in a lot of cases is that broaches the subject, but it's also a liability issue. as part of the proposal and stating the standard ways that you're going to do things, and it may be very simple. We're going to change default passwords, we're going to give you a list, we're going to disable unused services, that sort of thing. You have created a measurable statement in your statement of work, which opens up the discussion to the customer if they think that's not enough to go through. And it becomes a pretty painless way to broach it, and it also stops the issues that we have in an industry. One, you're doing the best thing, you're not being negligent, but also when it comes back down to that argument, a common system shall be configured securely is really opens up a lot of discussions on do I get paid. And so I think even the smallest AV companies can set that up. And conversely, on the customer side or the consultant side, it's important that they think about that and put that out as part of it. Because the first thing is the agreement and the conversation. Because we see a lot of controversy around statement of work at a level of detail that the AV industry would never allow to happen in something, they're specifying what the room brightness is going to be, how many nits off the projector. It's very similar within security. We have to start viewing networks as another environmental consideration of our products. And that if you view it that way in the AV world, then you can start down that path of being able to say, okay, we can integrate into that environment.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Mike, you made the comment that we need to be able to go toe-to-toe with the IT guys, and we had a bit of a baptism by fire with our VR product, where we actually got to the point where we have to engage the IT manager at the point of the start of the sale, where we need to talk about their network, what they've got, how we're going to integrate across different VLANs, all that sort of stuff. And unless we were able to actually have that discussion and understand what they were talking about, we would have been dead in the water. So I think it's important for most AV integrators and system integrators to upskill and get to that point where they can understand the language to be able to actually even have the discussion. Because it sometimes really gets pretty hard as well.
Yeah, and I'll chime in as well. I found the exact same thing. I spend all my time, I'm a bit of an anomaly within Crestron. I spend all my time working with large global enterprise customers, sitting at a table during design sessions, supporting stakeholders for a project. And the biggest challenges that I've seen at the beginning of the project are the AV team is afraid to ask some of the questions or put some of the issues on the table with the IT team, not because they're concerned they can't solve them. They don't speak the language, right? And they don't have a translator. So what I would tell all of you is, or advise you to, is that if you don't speak the language, it's okay. Say you don't speak the language, because the IT person will fill in the gap and vice versa, right? It needs to be really collegial and not adversarial. And again, within the industry, there are a ton of resources and a lot of really great places to get education. But it's definitely one of those fields where, if an InfoSec person starts to ask you questions about a particular piece of device, about, authentication type, encryption, things of that nature, sometimes those questions, while they might sound complex, they're 1- and 2-word answers. And if you answer with a paragraph because you are trying to talk around it, they're going to know that instantly. Their antennas are going to go up, and you're going to go down the path the rest of that project of any barrier or anything that's difficult when you put it through okay. So the next question, or the next thing that kind of comes to mind is, how about the weakest link? So I'll put this out for any of you guys, but what do you consider the weakest link in an AV system today, and how do you go about dealing with it?
One of the challenges that we see when we go into to the organizations we support today is the ad hoc nature of AV rooms. Some AV rooms are built for purpose, and some are built, whether it's a huddle room or a conference room. Some people come in, as you said earlier, different laptops, different flash drives, and they're sharing files and doing all kinds of things. Nobody thinks about what do I do when I leave the room. There's no process for shutting down the room. So For me, that's a real challenge. There's just not a lot of process around with the way they're sharing AV today.
Anybody else?
Back in the theme of preparation, I think the weakest link is typically the fact that even in systems that are not, let's be generous, natively highly secure, there are things that can be done, even to the level of changing the default passwords and everything else. So it is amazing how often, even still, we see AV systems that have just been left wide open, and the things that can be done aren't taken. So they don't change passwords, they don't log, they don't think about, maybe we put this on a VLAN and put some access controls to segment it from the network. So that is still, in a lot of cases, the weakest link. I got a email from a sales guy for a university who had just gotten pulled up in a security audit. And one of the things we're seeing is systems that have been installed for years are suddenly being audited, and it's because they used to say, well, that's a piece of AV gear, we know how to audit computers and everything else. But since the increase in posture and security, if it touches the network, it's under audit. So I got this email from the sales guy saying, can you please write a letter to the security department saying it's okay that their 455 touch panels all have the default password. And I had to say, no, I won't. Because ultimately the responsibility is the customer owns the risk, because the customer owns the asset. Risk is a combination of what's the vulnerability, what's the password, and what damage is going to happen financially. And that's a mathematical model. You say, is it worth the effort in fixing it? So nobody from a manufacturer, or for that matter from the integrator, can ever say this is the way to set up a system, because they don't own the risk. So the customer has to decide what that posture is and move forward, and then you use those tools to say what is appropriate. The best example I can think of, if I was going to go, I could put the exact same video over IP distribution system in a boardroom of a bank and in a sports bar. Very different what the appropriate level of security is, because the risk at the sports bar is somebody watches a hockey game on their iPad. The risk in a bank is somebody goes to jail for securities fraud or leaking information, or the very worst, your customers all leave because somebody's in another conference room browsing for stock tips.
Anybody else?
I think one of the weak links that we often overlook, we've got a whole pile of high-speed digital interfaces, right? They've got bidirectional communications. And, with the right person in the right meeting room, with the right skill set, an HDMI cable could potentially give you access to the corporate network. So, there's coming a time where we're going to have to start isolating the end user and the guest-facing digital interfaces. And we've started creating a couple of specific boxes to address exactly that.
So, Mike?
I'm going to give this credit to David. We just talked a little bit earlier about this. Something that he's noticing, and I saw as well, is some of the data that we have, and it may just be about what's happening in that room. The scheduling data could be highly sensitive, because it's, you could get the title of who's in there, you could get the topic of who's in there, and the patterns of where people are. So I think we've treated the data that we use within the AV environment, I think, a little lightly, and that could be a gap. And I give credit to David for that.
No, that's a good point. And let me expand a few other areas. So the presentation and what we've been talking about are about boxes, right? It's really widget-centric. How about people? So run in your mind back through the news for the last 2 years, right? Most of the really bad incidents happen, from someone who accessed something that was secure, right? Or a person that worked within the company, or a visitor that came into the company and got access to something. And how do you get access to things? I had a client, a very large enterprise client, say to me, hey, we're going to build some video conferencing rooms, codec, control system, AV gear, all the typical stuff, right? It's got to sit on the network. For the internal rooms, it's not a problem. But the rooms where we have people from the outside world come in, I can't have any wired LAN ports in the room. So we got to start thinking about how to remote all the signals in and out. That even comes down to scheduling panels, which they couldn't have, right? So there's two things that come up there. Number one, people, but number two, physical access, right? Because if I can put my hands on a piece of equipment, or I can put my hands on the wire, I can do something really bad. And there's this misnomer that what's the worst that happens if I get my hands, on the control system? I'm going to raise and lower the shades. No, I'm going to try and change. If I really know what I'm doing, I'm going to try and change the firmware on the box, and I'm going to turn it into something else. And that's where the really bad stuff happens. The difference is the people that are doing the really bad things aren't necessarily our colleagues and contemporaries, right? There are people from the hacking community that are used to attacking other devices for really malicious things. It's not that college student. I live in Boston, and as an integrator, I spent a lot of time at Harvard and MIT. And people would go scan the network and try and see what devices were out there because they were curious. They really weren't doing anything malicious. There were some incidences where students raised and lowered projection screens because they were on the network. But they didn't do it because they were trying to steal something. They were bored. What's that thing, right? And so a lot of our thought has been framed around that. But if you look at what's happening now, there's a whole new audience of people that are looking at our devices going, that's my launching off point, right? That's why this is really important. So it's not just the widget. It's not just the connection on the widget. It's not just does the widget, support Active Directory and authentication, and does it support encryption, does it support 802.1x so that I can ensure that that widget's still the same widget that I connected to the network, right? Then there's the whole layer about the people that do the bad things. So I would say that not only do we need to embrace the IT crowd, but when we're doing this, we also need to embrace the real estate crowd and make sure that we've got the physical security there, and maybe even the HR department, because they hand out badge access and things like that, right? So to truly solve this, it's a broader topic. The other piece that I would tell you, I had slides with scary stuff on there, and if you take no action, what's going to happen? Same thing happened yesterday. Until someone comes in and does an audit, I would tell you I wouldn't go from where you are today and go all the way to the extreme and throw everything out. But what I would tell you is it's all about balance. And Mike's started talking about this, right? Every company has different requirements. There are clients where, I years ago was bringing a wireless presentation device into a client site just to demo a prototype. And I came with my own access point because I know it's not going on their network. And I took the access point out of my bag, and I took the other widgets out of the bag, and I went to just plug it into power. And the customer jumped up and said, don't do that. If you do that, someone's going to show up at the front door. Huh? If you do that, within 3 seconds or 5 seconds, there's going to be an IT person here. Okay. I instantly know their frame of mind, their point of reference when it comes to security. I have other clients where they say, you know what, I don't care if there's a radio in the wireless device. That's great, knock yourself out. I won't stick it on the network. I might put it on the network for managing the device, but it's not for communication. Now, that's actually pretty dangerous, but again, you kind of run the gamut, right? So I tell you early on, it's very important to have those discussions to understand the mindset and the expectation of the team and to work collaboratively. Anybody else?
Paul? I'll make a quick comment on that. So in the security world, taking over and owning a box so you can go to the next step is called an attack vector. So they're looking for a weak link, which is essentially setting up a nice, comfortable nest to go and attack the real target set. And that is really how these advanced persistent threats happen. So that's why we're always checking for changes in firmware and looking at different things. And monitoring is important. So essentially, when you think of security in a broad term in AV, there's two possible things you're worried about. vandalism and espionage. Vandalism, the shades going up and down. Somebody could do a denial of service by doing a factory reset, taking a system off. But traditionally, with the exception of somebody getting in and doing an attack vector, espionage was not an issue. But now we're moving to a next step where we're actually sending media content, actionable information over the network. So if I have a PowerPoint slide that is sitting here and it's going across the network, that is a document. And so far, all the conversation in the AV industry has been around access control for administration. Now you're into a whole nother area of document and content control. And you have to think about the fact that if something can leave the room, is on a network, you can't say, oh, that's encrypted, because that will protect you. That's for what they call data in motion, and says, okay, somebody can't sniff it off the wire. But the level that the AV industry has dealt with encryption at this point is HTTP, which means that any valid receiver can decrypt it. So that means at some point, I could just say, well, I know there's an important board meeting going on. I'm going to book the conference room down the hall, close the door, and do some very simple things, because the nature of networks are they're very helpful. If you ask for information to be sent to you, it gets sent to you. So you have to consider what those controls are. Today, I'm not aware of any broad-based. It's very easy to secure a point-to-point communication with validation. It's very difficult to do that to a multi-site in the virtual matrix switch for any place, to tie it down to a person and say that person has access. But there are a lot of things that you can do and think about the standard. Very often I will see AV organizations that essentially make a room-to-room transmitter a bug. They always leave it on so that anybody can do it, because they're thinking of matrix switch. That HDMI connection is always into the switch, and I make my route just on the receive side. But if you think of the horrifying result of, okay, I'm going to have an HR meeting, they're broadcasting out to everybody because we want to tell about the next insurance. Everybody leaves, may or may not effectively shut down the system. That goes through. The next meeting that comes in, they plug in the laptop and say, okay, this is a secret list of who we're going to lay off next month, with the idea that it's going everywhere. That is a career-limiting type of situation. And even simple steps of saying, okay, when the room shuts down, we deroute everything. And that's not the sort of thing that the AV industry thinks about. So you have to think about this holistically in information and not just the IT. Because the IT department, when they give you their network rules, will never say about that, because that's not IT security. That's information assurance security, which is a completely different group. So you have to really start thinking about this holistically. For that matter, Windows, sightlines, all these other things you might think about. What am I trying to protect, and what are the potential ways to go against it? And that's what the responsibility of the people who are designing and implementing the systems have to think about. What are the potential problems my client will have, and to bring whatever level of solution, and be prepared that they might not care, or this may involve a design change. That's why it's important at the design session, because if you bring that up, that may be a change of equipment or a change of method, because they never thought of that potential vulnerability. I was very on the sideline after the fact, involved with a project that had a bank where they went through and had approval from IT and everything else for a total of 350 rooms connected by Dante. They built the rooms and then were told they couldn't turn the system on because the bank's internal information security people said that it wasn't acceptable and secure enough. IT had no problem with it because it didn't violate any IT security. It violated the operational security of the bank.
That's a few very, very, very good points.
And I hate to try to get paid when the customer says, no, we're not going to use your system.
Well, it creates a lot of problems, right? Even beyond that. Think about the cost of the business.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And I don't just mean for the equipment. People buy technology to accomplish more work in a shorter amount of time. So now all of a sudden, I take it and I've gone completely dark offline, and add insult to injury, I paid all this money for all these widgets. Anybody hear everything to add to that, or?
We had a very similar conversation yesterday in the booth. We're showing off one of the team collaboration devices, does whiteboarding, video conferencing, et cetera. And it was an AV engineer from a hospital. And we talk about sharing files in a healthcare scenario. Can a doctor share x-rays with a patient? Can he share, But it's just simple, it's just one-to-one. The conversation very quickly went to exactly what we were just talking about, and that is what happens to that file afterwards, and who has access to it, who can touch it afterwards. And so, well, what are your regulations? Obviously, you follow HIPAA and all the regulations within healthcare. And he said, that's another group. He said, sit down with them and talk about those issues that are more related to process, that are more related to people, before you bring the device in. That's why I smile when you have the page about different vendors in the environment. This is a single vendor device, supposed to be simple and secure, but somebody starts thinking about it and all these problems come up. And he very quickly went down the path that we just went down here.
So I think Paul was asking before, one quick comment. I'm glad you brought up the medical scenario, right? So again, I come from Boston, spent many years in integration as a consultant before I got to Crestron. I did a lot of work in healthcare. I did a lot of work in education, right? So I used to work with Partners Healthcare, Mass General, Brigham and Women's, pretty large organizations from Harvard Medical Teaching Hospitals. I worked in places like MIT and BU and Harvard. So I had really varying client sets. The rules were completely different from one to the next. So again, unlike a sound system to sound system, it doesn't work that way. So, I think it's really important to not only think about how do I actually take the steps and what are the things that I need to do, but also how does that apply to the market that I'm in? How does it apply to the vertical market in my particular environment? Because one doesn't fit all, other than to say, if I arm myself with the mindset of best practices, I need to make sure that the widgets that I'm picking have at least support these protocols, and at least start to broadly think about architecture on where I might place things. I'll be much better shape than I am today, but it's going to vary as we go from place to place.
Absolutely, and in some cases it's better, in some cases it's worse, depending on your viewpoint. In a regulated industry, there are sets of rules. So in the federal government, there's FISMA, the Federal Information Security Management Act. It sets out the rules for how security, IT security works in the federal government. In the financial industry, that falls under Sarbanes-Oxley. In healthcare, it's HIPAA. There's also the PCI DSS, which is anybody who takes credit cards. They're the ones who are killing Target. The airports actually fall under FAA, and in many cases, and my personal view is never classify anything AV as a emergency notification system, because then you have lots of paperwork. But that falls under then, if you're an adjunct to an emergency notification system as part of the digital signage on a college, you're falling under state and local, usually fire laws, on how these things work. So understanding what that regulatory agency that falls under, and now we're seeing that manufacturing companies that are ISO 9000 series, they now have to follow the ISO 27000 security rules. So we're seeing, plastic injection molding manufacturers sending us vendor audits on our IT, because that's required under ISO now, for them to continue to be a certified, injection molding novelty toy manufacturer to go through. So that's a good thing. If you're concentrating on an industry, get to know those frameworks and regulations of the industry, because it is amazing how often the customers, or especially the customers that you're dealing with, because their concentration is in operations, don't know those rules. And it's very often that you're going to have to say to the customer, yeah, sure, we can do that, but don't you have to follow HIPAA rules here? You might want to think about that, because once again, as an integrator, the worst time to find out about the security requirements is at the commissioning because you don't get paid. As a customer, the worst time to find out security requirements is after you've paid and you flunk your audit and get turned off.
Absolutely, absolutely, good stuff. I can go on and on, but I'm curious, I'll come around with the microphone. Does anybody in the audience have questions? Sorry, I don't have one of those cubes where I can put the mic in it and throw the cubes.
So I work for a financial regulator, so very secure environment. And we've isolated everything behind VLANs and everything AV is isolated. But, and to the point of it impacts the user. And we're trying to do standards and all this because we have a lot of custom things. But one of the things that you were saying about to have centralized control, but it isn't. Wouldn't that also create a problem? Because I can't access with my work computer my AV network to actually control any of that stuff.
So, yes, that is a problem. Historically, that has been the case. And without getting into product things, I represent AMX. My colleague here represents Crestron. Both of our companies have been very carefully looking at these types of issues, and we both have different solutions under the hood, but in the same vein of the master controller is hardened in such a way to be acceptable to security policy, and that'll be something that goes through. And then the rest of the AV equipment sits on a separate isolated network behind the master controller so that you have the proxy to be able to see things, make changes, talk to it from software running on the master controller while still having the advantage of the centralized management and maintenance. So if a projector dies, that's completely isolated from the network, but the master controller, which is not isolated from the network, can go and tell you about it. And I will say that, quite frankly, the entire AV industry is in its infancy as to how to deal with having better centralized management tools. But I know that at least among the Crestron, AMX, and Kramer, you go to our booths, that is a huge amount of what we're talking about, and I imagine they are, but I know I am spending a huge amount of money on that problem. And so it is moving forward. So I would really suggest you start talking to your manufacturers about that of your equipment and looking at that way. Do we have ways that we can open up something onto the network and go through the security? Because typically I am not customer facing, with the exception of when they need to get somebody in there to really talk under the hood and basic, but we all go through testing with the government, with large companies, with independent evaluators to figure out what these requirements are and to make them acceptable, because we realize it is critical, because the most important thing to most organizations are how can I manage this and how can I effectively provide the same level of service to that branch office with 100 people that I provide at headquarters, because I can't afford to sit a staff that can run down the office at every little remote branch office. So network connection is vital. And it's kind of strange from a manufacturer standpoint, because I have to go up in front of the review committees and say, I'd like $2 million to do something that our end customers think we already do, our AV integrators don't want, and it's impossible to show at a trade show, and talk them into it. Because there is no ROI in security. As I said, there's no way I can say I saved $170,000 on security, but what it does give us is that connection to the network which absolutely has ROI and options of control and go forward. So it's vitally important to all the manufacturers as it is to you. So that would be my advice in that case.
Yeah, and if you go back earlier on, right, so everything Paul said is spot on. Us manufacturers, we make building blocks. And you need to buy building blocks that will support your needs on the security side and on the application side. But there's another piece to it that we discussed earlier, and that's architecture. Right, so, something that's in the old days, I didn't have architecture discussions with my customers. They'd say, I want to do X, Y, and Z, and we'd put a design together and a signal flow and send everyone look at it and say, that's great. Now I find myself sitting on calls, right? In my case, we use Skype, but it doesn't matter. Sometimes it's WebEx. The point is, we're sitting on calls. We've got IT people, we've got AV people, we've got consultants, we've got integrators, we've got manufacturers, and we're all there. And literally, we're sitting around a Visio drawing, right? And passing control on the Visio drawing, and we're talking about where do we put things, architecture at a high level, right? Because, you start off with saying, I just need to check on a projector. How does this room talk to that room using codecs? And how do I stream content from this room to that room, to that building, to another building in another state? And oh, by the way, I need to get stuff up to another country. And oh, by the way, I run a global enterprise. So I'm monitoring and managing these across the network that span the globe. So there's just a whole host of issues. Oh, and by the way, right now, the people that come in and take care of our systems, they're not the bank employees or the hospital employees or the oil and gas company employees. They're contractors who do what? They come in with their tool sets. There's no way I'm putting that, right, on my corporate network.
Or more importantly, how do I allow them to get in and take care of it so they don't have a 3-hour drive to do a 10-minute job? Bringing down everyone's cost because the support people have to make money and bill for that. So it's something that if I could just open up my computer and do it in 15 minutes and bill you for a half an hour, I have to bill you for a half day or a day because of the travel time and the logistics involved in it. And how do I deal with that? Yes.
Absolutely.
So, I guess it's one of the complications when you're doing boardroom conference rooms and puzzle spaces and bring your own freaking devices, things in, and now you got to tell a conference with a bring your own device to, another campus or some place all the way across, and have remote support and all of that. How are you going about isolating something like that? I mean, what are your practices? I mean, when you say isolate, some people think, well, I'm just going to put it on its own subnet. It's isolated, right?
And some people will say air gap, right? Just to make the point extreme, right?
Yeah.
So
the common best practice in security is what we call defense in depth, which is put security every place that is necessary. And if you envision that security is, I have an asset, something somebody wants, and I have a bad guy, policy is a fence between them. There is no reason that fence can't be someplace else. So if the policy is, I have, some sort of security in there, you can say, well, we're going to put out a VLAN and we're going to limit the number of people coming in. Defense in depth says, hey, it's really easy to put a fence there too. We'll do it as well to give them as many things that come through. But that's where you're really talking about architecture. You have to start looking at holistically what's trying to be done and realize that you now have a much larger group of stakeholders involved in this. And the scary thing for the company I work for and the manufacturers is it's getting to the point where the least important thing in this entire conversation is what the AV box is. Because quite frankly, I have a very hard time going in and saying, my 8x1 HDMI switcher is so much better than this 8x1 HDMI switcher in switching video that is a ludicrous discussion. We're really looking at the fact that customers are buying solutions and efficiencies and solves the problem. And very much as an AV industry, we're still trying to sell boxes and looking at these little details when the important thing is the big picture and these architectures. So very much like our moderator here, I will go in and talk to a large company when they're looking at how we're going to move into these global deployments. I will be completely through 2 weeks of meetings, and at that point somebody can come in and talk about the boxes. Because the boxes that are going in are actually just details in what they really need to accomplish. And that's a big change in the way AV integrators and the AV manufacturers have historically gone with products.
Absolutely. In fact, I was talking about architecture before. We make, 2,000 building blocks. So at this point, I don't even worry about that, which is odd because I'm on the revenue, I'm on the sales side of our company. Right? My number one place to start is user experience, understand what's required, then I go talk with the IT team and figure out how we pull this off and make it work and what the expectations are. That's where some of the, is it air gap? How do we isolate things? How does all that work? Then I go talk to the operations people, right? How do we monitor it and manage it? Because we have to look at all these different silos and then figure out how to architect it and make it come back together. But I'll mention that, philosophically, we make 2,000 widgets because when you have an entire ecosystem, it's easier to put them together, and we understand the capabilities that are inside of all those boxes. And it's not always about the performance of how the 8x1 or 8x4 switches video. There's a far bigger picture there. Right? And that's why you'll see some of us are showing you these complete systems and complete ecosystem. Make no mistake, there was a slide that we put up that showed a very simple drop-in-place video conferencing. Why is that popular, right? It's scalable, it's secure, it was designed to be on the network. What we're doing, many of us philosophically, is saying, okay, we understand that concept, but we know that you guys also have some unique needs. So how do we help you fulfill the needs with something that can scale, can be secure, and be managed? Right? And that's why you're seeing some of the companies or manufacturers in the industry. There's a handful of us, right, that have been growing and the product lines are getting larger. And when you walk around the show floor, there's a complete story. Versus, I walk around the show floor and I say, this company makes 6 devices and they're really nice devices and they're great. If I have 10 rooms, it's probably wonderful. I don't, I'm not worried about the security side. But if I'm a big bank, a big hospital, if I'm a large tech company, right, I'm any large company, and I rely on my network to transact business, then I'm really concerned about that stuff, right?
And this becomes a existential crisis for the AV industry, whose entire self-image is built around the bespoke best of breed, when many times good enough is going to get you there because the more important thing is the system and the solution that, oh, this is the very best thing.
That's right. So we're coming right up on the end. So there's 2 more questions that I want to take.
So one thing that's really popular this year, excuse me, I lost my voice, is voice control. So is there any recommendations you would give for deploying voice control in an integrated room? Obviously, there's a lot of privacy concerns with that. And so I'd be interested in any thoughts regarding voice listening devices.
Personally, I think it's a little silly. And the reason is because when I talk to a user and say, I want voice control, they inevitably say, because I want to walk into a room and say, start my meeting, like Alexa knows my calendar. If we had integrated systems that understood identity and had access to schedule and everything else, we could have a button on the touch panel that says, start my meeting. So in my mind, anytime a customer comes to me and says, I want to do this, the first thing I need to do is say, why do you want to do this? What problem are you trying to solve that brought you to that conclusion? Quite frankly, I talked Apple out of using iPads to control their rooms at headquarters based on that sort of thing. Because users aren't good at unintended consequences. And they assume the characteristics of a technology or an application that they see are characteristics of the technology and not of the application that it's in. So if they want voice control, your biggest issues are going to be the fact that voice control as it exists today is putting a bug in your conference room that's going back to some big artificial intelligence that was recording everything at all times. And then, how is that going to interface to the back-end systems that allow them to do what they think that, what they really want to do? And is there a way to do that now? Because the big answer is, it's very difficult today for an AV system, even with room scheduling, to then go be able to reach into a panel, reach into a database and pull up meeting information and various other things. It's doable. It's an incredible amount of work.
Let me answer it this way because I don't want to get this one last question in, but let me say this. It comes back to expectations. So everything Paul said, 100% correct. And the theme of this, right, whether it's a question I asked or something you've asked, there's a really broad set of answers. So it comes down to expectation and what the customer and the customer's team is willing to accept. What we're saying is you need to start the conversation. You need to put some of these items on the table. You need to set the stage so people understand the full environment as they're making their decision. And then if they say, yep, I want to do voice recording, or I'm sorry, I want to do voice automated system start, no worries. Here's what we need to think about. Here are the concerns. If you're good with this, here's the way in which you can do it. If you're not good with this, then let's go down a different path, right? I mean, it just kind of comes down to balance and how much the InfoSec team will allow. I can happy to talk with you offline and bits and bytes and how you do it. It's a heavy lift. There's a fair amount of architecture to try and be somewhat secure.
I love the fact that you lost your voice in the accent. It's awesome.
Last question.
But it never works, I don't know why.
Hi, I work for one of the Massachusetts universities that Michael worked with. And I just wanted to provide a real-world example of how we look at security. And we have...
I was just looking to see. Oh, I see. Yeah.
We have all our AV devices on different segregated VLANs. And the important part to think about is what each device needs access to each device. We have public-facing devices like AirMedias and Solstice pods, and then we have encoders where the production team can have access to. You have to figure all of that out and figure out what ports are used for each of the devices. You give access to the right people on the right machines and what it needs to those VLANs. In terms of remote management, what we do is we have a VPN server that has separate tunnels for different groups. And so people log in from anywhere in the world, connect to the VPN, and each specific tunnel has an IP range that's assigned for the users. And those IPs are given access to specific parts of it. So it's fairly secure and you still have flexibility to manage. If you have a central management server somewhere, that also sits on a separate, for us as VPN, it sits on a separate VLAN. And that specific ports are open. That servers are different. One is going to use access to other VLANs. And the same goes for VPN going into the servers and operate still before. That's basically something we do.
That's fantastic. So you guys, in 2006, I used to work with you guys directly. I haven't been in many years. I still know a lot of people.
Yeah.
But I remember in 2006 what it looked like. Very different than what you described today.
Well, we've had a few security breaches, thankfully not as a result of AV devices, but and security has tightened up.
Sorry, can you just repeat some of that before the microphone?
We've had several security breaches recently in the last couple of years, and thankfully not because of AV, but security has really buttoned up since then. And so we're, as responsible AV technicians, we take steps to ensure that we're not the next thing to fall. Because people, hackers and intruders, they take the easiest path. So the most recent trend has been social engineering, email phishing, that kind of stuff. But as soon as that gets buttoned up, AVs might be the next target. So they'll do whatever's the easiest to get in.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing. Appreciate it. And it's, okay, we're 3 minutes over, so I apologize, but I'd like to thank the panel, and I'd like to thank the audience for the great questions. If anybody have questions offline, I'm sure the panels are happy to answer them. You can grab me, I'll hang out for a few minutes. And thank you very much, and enjoy the show.